Welcome back, Pokemon trainers, to the Victory Road Galar Farewell, sponsored by GGtoor, where we're heading into the top four. And why don't we take a little look at the top eight bracket here now to see who has made the semi-finals. We know that we will be casting the match between Juan Manuel and Mattie Morgan, both of whom we have featured on stream up to this point, Costa.
Yeah, exactly that. And both that have so far been winning their matches, naturally, for us to be able to be in this current situation. So they are already doing a very impressive and incredible job with keeping their runs live. Of course, I think this is going to be a very hype match, as a lot of people are very familiar with both Matty and Juanma in the VGC community, as well as all of their achievements. So I think this will be very, very exciting to see, especially with how both of their teams match up with one another.
Absolutely, yeah. We have that Gen 3 face-off again between the Kyogre and the Groudon, and it's really interesting that in the very first match that we streamed, which was Juan Manuel's, that was an incredibly quick game, and we've just seen Matty in his game, and that was a much longer one, so it'll be interesting to see the time difference, so to speak, between the two, and see how these players adapt to each other.
Oh, yeah, exactly that, because it's all about when you reach this sort of stage of a tournament, and let's say you're in top four, you know there's obviously going to be a lot on the line because you're so much closer to the sort of result that you're hoping to get, namely being winning the whole tournament. So there's a lot of additional stuff to take into consideration. You know that your opponents are on your equal level. They are looking at you straight in your eyes, and they're going to say, yeah, I want to win this. So you're going to be able to best them as much as you can, and maybe if you had a cheeky little look on the stream earlier on, be able to analyze a bit of their moves and items or sort of strategies that they like to be more fond of and use.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a really good point, and now we see here in more detail these teams. So we have the Zacian and Groudon, Incineroar, Charizard, Gastrodon, and Grimmsnarl from Matty, otherwise known as the classic Rinja Sun, versus the Zacian Kyogre, Celesteela, Grimmsnarl, Landorus, Therian, and Thunderous Incarnate coming out from Juan Manuel. So as we said, we immediately have that weather war, but we do have Grimmsnarls on both sides of the field as well. So both of those will be able to quite possibly set up some more bulk, some more defensive capabilities for these teams.
Yeah, as well as disruption, which was a bit of a theme from our previous set, and Maddie is all aware of. So I think it being able to disrupt on that sort of level and have the heightened priority based off of the prankster ability is great for utilization. We have seen a couple of tricks coming up from Juan's Pokemon as well at the top 32 stage, where I think there was an eerie impulse on that Thunderous, even though we actually did see it was a bit offensive and it had the capability of Dynamaxing. So it's a really cool sort of flexible set with that Thunderous that may be a huge threat, but it depends on what sort of Pokemon Matty may opt to go for when it comes to this Swordfish archetype that Juanma does. Surely, Charlie, you feel like the Gastrodon should come?
The Gastrodon should come here, really. We didn't see it in the last game from Matty, but Gastrodon really is there for any opposing Kyogres, which, of course, Juanma has here. Yeah, would be able to soak up any single target water-type moves, no problem, and in return get a boost to its special attack. And I'm looking at this Celesteela here, Costa, which we didn't see in the first game. Now, of course, as we saw in the last game, Matty loves to Gigantamax that Charizard, and Celesteela doesn't like facing that down.
No, it really doesn't, especially when it's powered by the sun. So we are, once again, as everyone can already be aware of, potentially going to be looking at a weather war between both of these Gen 3 Goliaths in their restricted. So I do think Celesteela could be very interesting of a brain. It kind of does. Dependent on its move sets, of course, I think it's got access to, let's say, Seed Bomb, if it so chooses to, if it's more of a physical sort of Celesteela. It can try to target down that Gastrodon with that ×4 super effective move, but then again, it acts as a very good barrier and wall towards the Zacian, so it's going to be tricky. I think the Landorus Therian makes a lot of sense, having the Intimidates available for both the Zacian and Groudon, as well as Incineroar and Grimmsnarl, to be honest, but then also potentially having a Rock-type move, accessibility on the Landorus, let's say in the form of either Rock Tomb or Rock Slide, would be very powerful against this Charizard if you've got the speed advantage.
That's right, the Landorus, which we saw somewhat of a surprise in the first game coming out against the Curum White, in this game makes far more sense, I would say, for that Intimidate, for its access to rock-type moves, but also, of course, we have to bear in mind the ground-type moves, which could deal with the Zacian and Incineroar very comfortably. And as you said, we'll just have to see the shenanigans that come out of the Grimmsnarls on either side of the field. Matty will not want to be repeating what he had in game one of the last round that we saw with a triple paralysis for all of his Charizard's Gigantamax turns. I mean, that was very upsetting to see.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was distressing, so viewer advised. But of course, we're going to see how that concludes. I think Matty may seem some good charm in bringing that Grimmsnarl. It makes a lot of sense. You're going to be able to disrupt and get some screens set up quite well, and you need to be able to sort of control, let's say, Juan M's Landorus there, or at least generally the Dynamax candidate, as from what we saw, there was a tricky little move on that Grimmsnarl that may be debuting once again in this match.
It may well be. We shall have to see as we get into the match. But one thing that can be said for this Landorus versus Grimmsnarl is if Matty's Grimmsnarl were to be carrying Thunder Wave, the Landorus would be immune. I think we had confirmation in the previous game that it wasn't, but just something to be aware of. And we see Landorus Therian and Thundurus Incarnate coming out, as well as Grimmsnarl and Charizard on Matty's side of the field. We've got double genies on Juan Manuel's side of the field, as that Charizard is primed and ready to go, although it doesn't like facing down either a Thundurus or a Landorus.
No, it really doesn't, and I do really like this double genie lead. It really puts the pressure on both for physical Pokemon that Matty may decide to lead with, as well as specially offensive ones with that Eerie Impulse as an option to be able to select. But we are going to be seeing the switch out from Matty's side, and a Dynamax coming out from Juan's, from what it looks to be this Landorus Therian.
That's right, Landorus goes big, and on turn one, applying that pressure immediately, and one wonders if the Thundurus on one side of the field is a Defiant variant, hoping to catch an Incineroar being led from Matty. But as it is, we see Grimmsnarl going for a Reflect to boost up the physical defense of the Pokemon on Matty's side of the field. But a Brick Break immediately removes that from the Thundurus, meaning that the Pokemon are just as undefensive as they were before, and an Airstream coming out from the Landorus takes out the Grimmsnarl immediately, giving a boost to speed in the Landorus and Thundurus on Juan Manuel's side of the field, and that's a very decisive turn one, Costa.
It really is. Access has been denied for use of that Grimmsnarl. So, especially with the fact that you go ahead and you break the screens immediately, the same moment, and of course, the Reflect gets set up, and you've got the Life Orb Landorus Therian. That hits like a truck. That is gonna... It's one of the strongest Pokemon that you can completely want to utilize, having Intimidate. As well as its typing, with Dynamax, synergizes very well. You get those max Airstream boosts. Very tough to be able to slow that Pokemon down, especially when you had a Pokemon like Grimmsnarl, which had Trick and a Lagging Tail. That is the Pokemon you want to utilize to slow down this Landorus from just sweeping your team. And so far, it's looking like a very strong strategy from Juan's side.
It really is, yeah, that Grimmsnarl, unfortunately, Matty was not able to get any use out of the Grimmsnarl, given the Reflect that it set up was immediately broken by the Brick Break, and now he's brought out the Charizard in the face of this Dynamax Landorus, which could well be carrying a Rock-type move, which is Charizard's worst nightmare. So it'll be interesting to see how Matty positions himself here. Of course, though, we have to bear in mind that the Gastrodon on Matty's side is something that Landorus doesn't love seeing either, because of the doubly super effective Ice-type move it can dish out onto the Landorus, and indeed the one-time super effective on the Thundurus. But instead, we see a very a passive play from Matty. He's going for a double protect on both the Gastrodon and the Charizard, but of course, even though the Gastrodon there is protecting, it's not going to be able to take no damage at all from the Max Quake coming out from the Landorus.
Yeah, and that's a very respectable amount of damage through Protect there. Of course, the quarter of the regular damage output that it would have been receiving. And in this scenario, it makes a lot of sense for Mattie to go for a passive play there. You want to try to slow down the Dynamax turn availability over on Juan's side. On the other hand, Juan, getting that Max Quake set up right there is very, very useful. You're able to kind of go ahead and allow your Landorus to survive an Ice Beam as well, or, you know, subject to any sort of critical hits that come out, of course. But you do want that particular boost in the special defense when you're going up against a Charizard and a Gastrodon, especially when there is a potential for having the Sun available for Charizard in the back.
Absolutely, Costa. Those special defense boosts will pay dividends for the Pokemon that Mattie currently has out on the field for this Landorus, and with the Thundurus there as well, able to provide some support. It's quite a threatening duo coming out from Juan Manuel, doing exactly what it did in the first game, overwhelm quickly, albeit the Landorus was not able to apply such pressure immediately because it was facing down a Cura. But now we see Zacian coming out for the Juan Manuel, and a Gastrodon switching out for Mattie, with Groudon coming in from the back, setting up the Sun, which is exactly the condition under which Charizard wants to be, being able to deal massive damage with its Fire-type moves, or any other type moves, from its Solar Power ability, as we see Mattie committing the Dynamax onto that Charizard.
This may be a max guard. I think Mattie has to be conscious of the potential for that max Rockfall going into that slot. If there is no sort of Charty Berry, which I think we got confirmation there wasn't on Mattie's Charizard, this will be going down if it does not protect itself, as Lando is faster, and proves that to be the case, as Max Rockfall goes straight into and absolutely annihilates that Charizard from this game one.
Oh dear. Mattie was not able to get any use out of his Gigantamax this game, as well as in that first game where he got the triple paralysis. It was a bold call. It was a bold call making that Gigantamax in front of Dynamax Landorus. Clearly he was just praying that he would survive in order to deal some big damage back. And of course, if it had survived, it would have propped a weakness policy. But perhaps he was thinking, because Landorus isn't a rock type, it doesn't have that same type attack bonus, maybe there's a chance I'll survive, even though it's holding the life orb. But alas, it was not to be.
No, it definitely wasn't. And I think, to be honest, the times 4 weak to rock, especially powered by Life Orb, there is never a chance that Charizard's going to survive. And I think in this situation, it must have just been a call that Mattie wanted to make there, because he may have expected, surely Max Guard is a bit too predictable, and Juan will read into that and just target into my other slot. But no, we saw that not the case, as we actually have a reveal of Grass Knot on this Landorus Therian. What more can it not do? Dealing quad effective damage onto the Gastro, not quite enough to pick up a KO, but deals enough to allow for the double up to do so from the Zacian.
That's fantastic. Yeah, what a way to deal with a Gastrodon, having that Grass Knot reveal on the Landorus. It's not a move you see all the time on Landoruses, but it certainly helps with the Gastrodon matchup, with Juan Manuel, of course, bringing a Kyogre in his 6, meaning that the Landorus is able to deal with those Gastrodons, as we see a Precipice Blades from Groudon connecting down on the Zacian, taking it down to quite low health, but as you say, Costa, doubling up on that Gastrodon. It's a Pokemon that can really cause some issues, stalling with yawns and so on, and something to remove quickly, and Mattie realizes that there's not much he can do in this position and decides to forfeit. So game 1 goes to Juan Manuel.
It does indeed, and I think there's a lot of things to take into consideration and take back to the drawing board if you're Mattie. Of course, that lead, my lord, that is such a powerful lead into this matchup, the double genie. You've got so much going for yourself that you cover for, where you either have the option of Dynamaxing the Thundurus, you got option of Dynamaxing the Landorus. Even before Dynamaxing them, you already have a very solid sort of board state where you've got damage mitigation on both the physical and special offensive side, if you so choose, for it to be the case, with Intimidate from the Lando and potential Eerie Impulse from Thundurus. And just having that sort of combination where you could either Dynamax the Thundurus, go for Max Airstream, and have Landorus Life Orb with Earthquake next to you to deal spread damage is just busted, if you ask me. And in this scenario, makes a lot of sense for Juanma to lead with it. So Mattie's really going to have to try to think about how he could break that lead.
Absolutely. The Earthquake, of course, we should mention that the Thunderous is immune to that, being a flying type. So, of course, it takes no damage, but everything else on the field takes a huge amount of damage. And, of course, Matty now has the confirmation of the Brick Break on Juan Manuel's Thunderous. So it's got to think twice before it sets up any screens if the Thunderous is around, because they could just be immediately rendered null and void, as we saw in that game.
Yeah, we definitely did. And I think the fact that the Grimmsnarl thought it was safe to set up a Reflect and then Thunders was like, nope, kind of says a lot about Grimmsnarl's usability when it comes to that sort of lead. I think if Matty does decide to go ahead with that same lead, you need to try to utilize that trick. You need to get it off as soon as you can and not give any sort of breathing room for any of those two Pokemon to Dynamax. But question is, do you expect to Dynamax A? And B, which one out of the two? So that's a tough call to make.
Exactly, it's a really tough situation to be in, but that may well be the play that we see Matty going for here. But this time, Juan Manuel leads his Zacian and Grimmsnarl, a complete switch up to what he's done in this game and the first game that we saw on stream. Meanwhile, we see Grimmsnarl and Gastrodon coming out for Matty. Very interesting switch up here from Juan Manuel, going for a completely different strategy, clearly, and presumably something that Matty has been completely taken by surprise by, and we'll have to see how he responds.
Yeah, most definitely. I think being able to have Zacian on the field, maybe Juanma was sort of expecting the Grimmsnarl disruption, so it makes sense, right? I want to try to neutralize that Grimmsnarl ASAP, whilst also having some sort of disruption from my own side and having my own Grimmsnarl, which could make sense.
That's right, yeah, both these cheeky Grimmsnarls able to deal some very annoying support moves on both sides of the field, but we actually see Matty's being withdrawn in favour of the Zacian. Meanwhile, Zacian on Juan Manuel's side of the field goes for a play rough, and it's a one-hit knockout with the critical hit on the Gastrodon on Matty's side. That is crushing for Matty. Oh, that is not a critical hit that you want to see. Meanwhile, we see Grimmsnarl getting a little bit of chip damage on that Zacian, which, it all adds up, but not doing too much for the time being. Wow, that Gastrodon has just gone, Costa.
Yeah, pretty much Control-Alt-Delete in that situation. I think it's quite tough because early meta, we had Gastrodons that wouldn't, or at least it was a role based on whether they could survive a play rough or not. Later on in the meta, as it progressed, we saw that Zacians, instead of jamming everything into its attack training, we saw that there was a bit more bulk added to it, and then the Gastrodons started bulking up more in their defensive prowess. So it kind of balances to the point where logically that Gastrodon was not going to go down, but that crit was enough to push it just over the edge.
That was indeed a crucial crit there, as Matty says, you know what, I've had enough of this. I'm just going to deal out as much damage as I possibly can with my Dynamax Groudon, which of course is not something that the Zacian on Juan Manuel's side of the field wants to see. It seems as though Juan Manuel is not going to be responding with a Dynamax because Zacian can't, and Grimmsnarl doesn't really want to, being a more supportive Pokemon. We see the Reflect coming out from the Grimmsnarl, so that will at least increase the survivability on both sides of the field, and we do see that Berry from Juan Manuel's Grimmsnarl as Matty's Zacian goes for a Behemoth Blade into it, and through the Reflect is probably going to survive on minimal HP, and that survived better than I was expecting.
Yeah, it definitely did. I think it's taken into consideration the Reflect being set up as well, as the Babiri halving any steel-type damage being dealt onto it super effectively. So we do have the Behemoth Blade, wow, dealing a lot of damage from Juan Zacian onto that Dynamax Groudon, as the Dynamax Groudon is going to try to counter that proposal with a Max Quake, but not quite enough pick up the KO, leaving the Zacian on minimal hit points available.
Absolutely, that Reflect coming in crucial there because the Zacian on Juan Manuel's side of the field is able to survive. And yes, this Grimmsnarl is sticking around, will be able to deal out further shenanigans this turn. The Zacian on Matty's side of the field is looking relatively healthy. But, as we've been saying this stream, a little bit of HP is still infinitely more than zero, and that is exactly the case for the Zacian on Juan Manuel's side of the field.
Yeah, it most definitely is, and in this scenario, Juanma does still have the Grimmsnarl on the field. It is still up for shenanigans, similar to scaring the Zacian down with its very scary face to -2 of its speed, whilst Juanma Zacian now is going to capitalize off of this speed drop interaction and capitalize off of picking up a KO on this Groudon. Not looking good for Matty right now.
Oh dear, yes, Mattie's Groudon goes down. That was huge damage coming out from both those Behemoth Blades there, as we see Mattie's Zacian respond with a Behemoth Blade going down into Juan Manuel's own Zacian, so that will be enough to pick up the knockout, but my goodness, Juan Manuel's Zacian put in the work, so it's fulfilled its purpose. I'm sure Juan Manuel doesn't really mind about the Zacian going down in that scenario. It's just got rid of the Dynamax Groudon. And here comes that pesky Landorus, Costa.
Yeah, Landorus is on the field. It is going to go ahead and get an Intimidate drop of the attack stage, both the Zacian and Grimmsnarl, whilst, of course, let's not forget, Juan does have access to his Dynamax still, and he's going to be able to pretty much capitalize off of it as much as he can. He does need to be aware of the Grimmsnarl over on Maddie's side, still having the availability of the Trick Move and Lagging Tail, so that is something to consider. But in this scenario, I think the fact that Zacian is at neutral attack and Juanma's Grimmsnarl had already previously set up the Reflect, it should not be taking this Landorus Therian down in any sort of way, unless there is maybe some beneficial RNG that Mattie can try to exploit.
That's right, there might be a high damage roll, and it's getting to a point in the game, potentially, where that is something Mattie just has to hope for. But we now see Juan Manuel going for his own Dynamax. Mattie's being completely eradicated, meaning that this late game Dynamax, this Landorus Therian is in a very strong position heading into this turn. It's looking threatening, it's looking intimidating, as it's already dished out that Intimidate onto Mattie's side of the field. And we'll see what it goes for here. First of all, though, we see Zacian going for a Protect, a very wise move in front of a Dynamax.
It does make a lot of sense, as we are going to be seeing the Trick followed up. Does target down the Landorus Therian, does give it a lagging tail, whilst giving itself a Life Orb for good measure. As we are going to be seeing the Max Quake, wow, still dealing a lot of damage onto that Zacian. Well, there we go, it's a critical hit. That makes a lot of sense, even without a Life Orb, right? But I think in this scenario, Juanma's Grimmsnarl is yet to move, likely going to be targeting down its arch nemesis on the other side with a Spirit Break, as it is still susceptible to super effective fairy-type moves.
That's right, Massive Grimmsnarl down to about a third of its health, and now that Zacian has protected, it's going to have to either switch out or go for an attack, or risk a double protect, which is only about a 30% chance of happening. So this Landorus is looking incredibly threatening indeed. Zacian does get its Behemoth Blade off first, but again, through that Protect, and with the Intimidate on it, it shouldn't do a great deal of damage. It's still respectable. Its Landorus has just above half of its health remaining, as we see another Spirit Break coming out from Juan Manuel's Grimmsnarl into Mattie's, and that is enough to pick up the knockout.
Yeah, and I think Mattie just had to hope for the critical hit onto that Landorus Therian, that I didn't see any other way out. But judging from the damage dealt, because of the fact that Mattie's Zacian is neutral and it's not at +1, I'm not even sure if that would have been able to be enough, as Juanma is just going to go ahead, wrap this set up 2-0 versus Mattie Morgan, and just progress himself onto the finals for the tournament.
What a performance. Absolutely incredible. He went 8-0 yesterday, won all of his games. We saw him have a very convincing win in the first game on stream. And now he's just done it again, and he's going all the way to the finals. He's looking incredibly convincing. He's going to be someone, I feel, who's going to be quite sad at this point to be saying a Galar Farewell, because it's going so well for him right now. But we'll have to see who he's up against in the final. Will he meet his match?
Yeah, exactly that. And I think commiserations, of course, to Mattie. He did incredibly well. Once again, as he tends to have that consistency factor, which is so rare and hard to have when, interacting with VGC formats and generally different formats as well. It's very hard to reach that sort of level of consistency. And I think he's done a very good job to be able to do that. And of course, Juanma, like we said, he does go ahead and progress onto the finals. At the minute, we are not 100% certain on who has won the other semi-final, but we will be able to inform you lovely people of it after a short break. So go ahead, get your refreshments, get ready for this entertaining final to end all Gala tournament-based tournaments, should I say. But yes, don't go anywhere after you get your refreshments, of course, but we'll be right back.